We have some catch-up to do. We're on Lamed Beis, Amid Beis. We had done the Mishnah yesterday, and the Mishnah had told us a number of things that we're not allowed to do because you're doing a type of tikkun with different objects. The first thing is that you're not allowed to break a piece of pottery to make it into smaller shards in order to use as insulation for grilling a fish. And the same thing with cutting pieces of paper. So the Gemara asks, "My taima, mishum dekamasake mana." The reason is because you're fixing an object, you're fixing a kli to make it usable, and that you're not allowed to do on Yontif. Next, ve'ingorfin tanor vikirayim. The next thing the Mishnah told us that you're not allowed to do from yesterday's Mishnah is that you're not allowed to sweep out an oven if there's debris that falls from the oven ceiling onto the ground, and it makes the oven dirty and uneven. You're not allowed to sweep that out. So Tony Rabbi, Rav Chia bar Yosef Kameda Rav Nachman, v'im efshar la'afos el'im ken gorfo mutar. He says if the debris makes it impossible to bake because there's so much debris that you can't adhere the dough to the walls of the oven, so then you're allowed to sweep it out. Because we're not going to completely preclude you from having simchas yontif. We just want you to minimize the amount of weekday activity that you do. Devisu de Rabbi Chia nafala aricha b'tanur b'yamatava. So Rabbi Chia's wife, it once happened that on Yontif a brick fell and made a lot of debris in the oven. So Amar la Rabbi Chia chazida anarifta ma'al yasa bo'ina. So Rabbi Chia says to her, Mrs. Rabbi Chia, be careful, I like good bread on Yontif. So basically he was telling her that for a guy like me who likes good bread, you better sweep it out. Amalei Rava l'shamei Tivili avaza v'izdahar mecharocha. And Rava similarly said to his attendant, he said, please roast for me a goose in the oven, but be careful not to singe it. And the way Rashi explains it is when you have debris in the oven, is that even when you lower the goose in on a skewer from the top of the oven, like a rotisserie goose, right? Mm-hmm. If there's debris that it's going to be in contact with, it's going to singe the flesh of the goose. And Rava said, I don't like burnt goose flesh.
Is the point?
And the goose is cooked, right? So therefore he said, yeah, very good. So he said, remove the debris.
Is the point to the Gemara that shouldn't be said directly to clear the oven, or that's not the point?
I don't know that I don't see that from Rashi. It's an interesting idea. Was he just saying it b'derech remez? There's no inyan when you're speaking to a Jew. When you're speaking to another Jew, there's no inyan of doing it b'derech remez. You're speaking to another Jew. It's not like you're speaking to a goy. We only find that this issue of remez,
unless it's not very yontif to
maybe.
Jumble the.
All right, interesting. It's interesting how. Or I'm not sure. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, Amar lon Ravacha mehutzal demar sharkin le tanura biyamatava. So Ravina says to Ravashi that Ravacha of Hutzal told us that you, Ravashi, want the oven to be sealed with a certain type of clay on Yontif. And Ravina was essentially suggesting to Ravashi that he had a problem with that. What right do you have to take clay and mold it into something that's going to seal off the vents to make the oven hotter? Because after all, you're not allowed to do gibel, you're not allowed to knead dough, or to make, to knead clay into something that you needed. So Amarle, Anan Arikta de Para Samchina. So Ravashi says, it's true what you heard about me, but I use a clay from the Euphrates, the banks of the Euphrates River, where it's already made into clay. It's not like I have to prepare it in any way. So therefore there's no kneading involved. I just take a slab of that earth and I slop it onto, or glop it onto the oven vent, and that way it gets hotter. Bahani mili the tzaire may esmol, but that's only provided that you designate where from the riverbank you plan to take the clay, so that you prepare it from before. And Amar Ravina v'kit mashari, and Ravina says ash is permitted. So Machlokas Rashi and Tosfos over here, what we mean by ash. Rashi says that you're allowed to mix the ash with water and use it as a type of putty sealant for the vent to keep the oven hotter. And Tosfos says, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're allowed to take dry ash only, but it's a machlokas.
Does this imply this doesn't have to be prepared until Yom?
Presumably, the ash would have to be prepared from the day before also. But you could append that to the previous statement, yeah. The next thing the Mishnah had said is that you're not allowed to create a makeshift grill or oven or stovetop, I should say, by taking two barrels and putting a fire in between the two and positioning the pot over the two barrels so that it gets cooked that way. So Amar Rav Nachman, Avonim shel beis hakisei muter litzadadon b'yom tov. In an unrelated statement, Rav Nachman said that you're allowed to arrange stones to make yourself a latrine on Yom Tov, so that if you need to defecate and you need a place to sit down, you can set up the stones in such a way that you'll be sitting over a hole in the ground. So Eisvei Rabbi Rav Nachman ein makifin shtei chavuyos lisvos aleinas hakederos. So Rabbi challenges Rav Nachman from our Mishnah. You're not allowed to create even a makeshift structure like making a stovetop, even a makeshift stovetop on Yom Tov. So why is it any different from making a latrine? So Amar Lei Shiny Hasam Mishum Deka'avid Ahala. So first, initially, Rav Nachman answered and said, well, it's different in the case of the stovetop because since you're putting the pot over two barrels, it's like you're making a covered structure. That's an ohel, that's an enclosure, and that's more problematic. So Amar Le Rabba Zuta Le Ravashi Ela Me'ata. So, but Rabba Zuta says to Ravashi, I don't understand the answer. If that's the case, then Bana Itztaba B'Yom Tov Delo Avid Ahala Hachanami Deshari. So, are you going to suggest that as long as you're putting something together, as long as it doesn't create an enclosed area, then it's not a problem? Does that mean that you can construct a chair on Yom Tov that involves mortar and bricks? Amrlei Hasam Binyan Keva Asra Torah Binyan Aryai Lo Asra Torah. So Ravashi says, well, I have a modified answer. My explanation as to why there's a difference between a latrine and a stovetop is as follows. Really, the Torah prohibits making any structure which is permanent, like a chair that's affixed to the ground with bricks and mortar and so forth. The Torah never prohibits a makeshift structure. V'gozu Rabbanan al binyan arai mishum binyan keva. And the rabbi said, don't make a makeshift structure lest you come to make a permanent structure. V'hacha mishum kevodo lo gazru bei rabbanan. And so why is a latrine okay? Because of kavod abrios. Because people need to defecate, and it would be a lack of dignity to the human being to not give him a place where he could go to relieve himself. And that's why the rabbis alleviated their restriction when it comes to making a latrine. So it's really got nothing to do with ohel, not an ohel according to Ravashi. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hai medurta milamala lamata shari, milamata lamayla aser. So Rav Yehuda now says, and he's actually going to qualify our Mishnah as well, but in the course of qualifying our Mishnah, which talks about the prohibition of setting up that makeshift stovetop, he's also going to tell us that there are other ways to do makeshift structures as long as you do a shinoi. And the first case that he gives us is that there was something called a medurta, which was what they would do is they would, for festive occasions, they would make a bonfire, but it was a bonfire box. So what you would do is you would take 4 planks of wood, you would put them all together to make a cube, right? And then you'd put sticks on top, and then you would ignite the whole thing, and it would make a very large bonfire. But since the construction of this bonfire is like a structure, you have to, if you want to make it, you have to do it with a shinoi. So instead of building the walls and then putting the kindling sticks on top of that, first you hold the sticks on top, and then have a few other people bring the boards and put them underneath the sticks. That's the way that you should do it. V'chein beyasa, v'chein kedera, v'chein purya, v'chein chavisa. And the same thing with these 4 kinds of makeshift structures. One is a way of roasting eggs. And Rashi explains you would use some kind of grill, and then you would put the grill on some kind of stand, like a tripod, and you would put the fire and coals underneath it. So you can construct that, but hold the eggs up first, then put the grill underneath that, and then put the sticks to make the tripod, and then put your fuel. Do everything backwards. Instead of building it from the bottom up, build it from the top down. And the same thing is true with a kedera, which is the case of our Mishnah, which is where you want to put the 2 barrels and make the makeshift stovetop. Hold the pot first, then bring the barrels, and then put the fuel, so that you're doing everything backwards. V'chein purya, and the same thing with a bed. If you want to make a bed, you need 4 legs, you need a frame, you need leather straps. Apparently, this is for a bed which is meant to be collapsible, or
like a Murphy bed, folds up.
Not so much a Murphy. That's a little bit too technologically advanced. We're talking about really something that is meant to be taken apart and put back together. But here, since it's a little bit of more of an elaborate putting together, do it backwards. Instead of putting the legs and then the frame and then the leather straps, hold the leather straps in place, then put the frame around it, and then put the legs underneath. It obviously takes more effort, takes more people to do it, but this we can justify it because you're avoiding the act of construction. And finally, v'chein chavisa, and the same thing with the when you want to. Rashi says that this is talking about organizing barrels in a shed or in a cellar. That since that way you organize it is in such a way that you'll maximize the efficiency and also that the barrels will be secure, you tended to put one barrel resting on top of two barrels. So it was almost like an act of you're creating structure. So therefore also do it upside down. Hold the top barrel and then bring the two bottom barrels instead of doing it the normal way.
Is he talking about Shabbos also, I guess?
Probably.
It's not
The halacha is not like this, is it?
What?
The halacha is not like this. We put the pan on the fire first and then throw the egg in for cooking it on Yontif.
There's no active construction there, though. Here we're talking about creating structures, makeshift structures.
Cooking the egg on the coal.
All of these issues are not related to cooking, other than the fact that you're doing it in order to cook.
Right.
But the prohibition is not because of cooking. The prohibition is because of making a structure that's
starting
temporary.
with nothing.
Yeah.
You just
right.
have the egg and the pieces.
Right. Next. Ve'ein.
To crack some eggs. Get that.
Yeah. Ve'ein somchenes hakadera b'bakas v'chein b'delis. You're not allowed to support a pot with a log of firewood, nor with a door. So the Gemara says, "B'delis al kadaitach." Why wouldn't you be allowed to support a pot with a door? And as like Rashi further asks, since when can you support a pot with a door? The whole purpose of supporting the pot is to create this makeshift tripod so that you can use it as a stovetop. How is the door going to help you do that? So the Gemara says, "Elaima v'chein hadelis." What it means is you're not allowed to use a piece of firewood to prop open a door. Right? That's the way you understand the Mishnah. And basically the Mishnah is taking the following approach, is that even though, with the exception of Rebbe Nechemya, once something is non-muktzah, you can pick it up and do with it whatever you please, when it comes to firewood, since it has a very specific designation from before Yontif, that it's only meant for hasaka, it's only meant for fuel, you really can't use it and justify even picking it up for any other utility other than using it for fuel. So if you've got a shed with chopped wood for your fireplace, you can't now take one of those logs and use it as a prop, use it to as a door stopper or something like that. That's essentially what the Mishnah is saying. Tanu Rabbanan, ein somchenes hakadera b'bekas, v'chein hadeles lefi shelo nitnu eitzem elo lahasaka of Reb Shimon Matir. So that's essentially what this brisa has spoken out. But Reb Shimon, who is the famous Reb Shimon, who doesn't hold as much of the laws of muktzah, tells you that no, you're allowed to. You're allowed to handle it. Once you're allowed to on Yontif handle it for firewood, you can handle it for all purposes. Ve'ein manhigin es habehema b'makel b'yom tov Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon matir. And the last statement of our Mishnah was, you're not allowed to lead an animal with a stick on Yontif out in public places. And we thought that the reason was because, again, you're using wood for a non-firewood purpose. And Rebbe Elazar b'Reb Shimon says it's mutter. So lema Rebbe Elazar b'Reb Shimon ki avua svira leideles leimuktzah. Let us suggest that Rebbe Elazar b'Reb Shimon is holding like his father Reb Shimon, who holds that you can be liberal with the laws of muktzah, and that's why you're allowed to pick up the stick to use it as a prod for your animal. So the Gemara says, "Lo baha afilu Reb Shimon moida mishum demechzi kamanda azal lechinga." So the Gemara says, not necessarily so. It could be that Reb Shimon, the father, is also machmir here, and it's got nothing to do with muktzah. It's got to do with the fact that there's a myras ayin here, that when you're seen out in the open leading an animal with a prod, then it looks like you're taking him for mercantile activity, taking him out to the marketplace. And that's the reason why it would be usher, even when the stick is non-muktzah. So it's altogether possible that Reb Shimon would agree like with the Chachamim and not with his son, Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon. So Chizra, now let's go to the next topic, which is Chizra. What is Chizra? Rashi explains that it's a branch of a tree, where the tip of the branch is very sharp, so you can use it as a spit. You can use it as a spit for barbecuing. But the problem, once again, is that wood, unless it's been prior designated for that specific utility, is normally meant for firewood. So Rav Nachman Asar Rav Shesha Shor, Rav Nachman says it's prohibited, Rav Shesha says it's permitted. Beritiva kuli alma lo pligi di asar ki pligi bi aveshta. There's no machlokes when it's a moist stick then it's going, which cannot be used as firewood. Everyone would agree that that's usr. It's totally muktzah. The only machlokas if it's with a dry stick. So manda usr amar lecha lo ninu eitzim elo lahasaka, umanda shari amar lecha mali litzlos bo mali litzlos begachalto. So if you hold that you cannot use the stick for a spit, it's because you can only use sticks for firewood. The other manda amar says, listen, chevra, let's figure this out. You're using this for a weenie roast, right? So you want to use this wood to roast your hot dogs or your marshmallows, right? What difference does it make whether you're going to use it as fuel for the weenie roast or you're going to use it as a spit for the weenie roast? You're roasting weenies with the stick. So therefore, since it's all in the category of roasting, right? So what difference does it make if you're roasting with it as a spit or roasting with it as firewood, as a piece of charcoal?
I would have thought that a moist one would be the preferred one.
Because
Because it won't burn when you're using it as a spit.
But there's a counter argument to that, which is that the moist one is totally muktzah. When yantiv comes in, it has no designated use whatsoever. It's not a kli, it's not usable as firewood, and therefore that's the argument why everyone would hold that it's usr. But Bob, let's take a look at the other opinion. Ika da Amri, there's another opinion that says that with a dry stick, everyone would agree that it's okay, because of the argument that we just gave, that it's being used in the family of roasting, so it makes no difference. But kipligi beritifta, the machlokus is with a moist stick. Manda asr lo chazi lahasaka. So if you hold that it's asr, it's because since it's not usable for firewood, you can't use it for anything. And umanda shari armalacha chazi lahesegadol. And the mandomer who says that it's okay to use, he says, look, you can't use it for a small fire, but even a moist stick can be used for a larger bonfire. It'll eventually dry out and it'll be added as the fuel. So therefore, since it can be used as far as a part of a bonfire, you can also use it as a spit to roast your weenies also. V'hilchasa yavesh the shari retifta aser. And the final halacha, says the Gemara, that a dry stick is permitted, a moist stick is aser. Now comes along Rashi, and Rashi tells us that the whole cadence of this sugya is going like Rava, who is a student of Rebbe Yehuda. And as a student of Rebbe Yehuda, this Gemara is more machmir. But we hold like Reb Shimon. And in all of these cases, where there's a question of muktzah sticks, Reb Shimon is more lenient. So just keep that in mind. Tosfos equivocates on that issue, but Rashi seems to be quite clear on it. Darash Rava, Isha lo sikanes ladir ha'etzim litol mehem ud. Number one, Rava says that a woman cannot go to the woodshed to pull out one of the pieces of firewood to be used as a poker, meaning that she wants to use it as a stoker for the firewood. That's not legitimate. And furthermore, if you have a poker that had already been designated from before Yantav as a poker, and then it breaks, you cannot change its functionality to add it as fuel to the fire. Because you're allowed to burn with kalim. In other words, you can take a kli and use it as fuel, but you can't take a broken kli that breaks on Yantiv and use that as fuel, because the broken kli is muktzah. So the Gemara now says, Lamerma derava keRebbi Yehuda svira leidis le muktzah. This all implies that Rava holds like Rebbe Yehuda, who's more machmir in the laws of muktzah. But I know a story about Rava. I guess he loved goose. Here's another story. He told his servant or his attendant, roast a goose for me, and then after you've roasted it, when you pull out the kishkas, but before, I guess you pull out the kishkas before you roast it. When you pull out the kishkas, throw it to the cat. Now, if you hold like Rebbe Yehuda, any animal that had been designated for human consumption, you cannot take any part of that animal and then handle those entrails and give them to cats, because something that was designated for human consumption cannot now be changed for animal consumption. And therefore, those entrails should be considered to be muktzah, according to Rebbe Yehuda. What right did Rabbi say to throw them to the cat?
You can't have enough from it?
No one's talking about hana. We're talking about muktzah. We're talking about muktzah. There's an issue of muktzah. It's got nothing to do with benefit. It's got to do with the fact, am I allowed to handle this? Can I handle this on Yantiv? Can I pick it up and deal with it if it actually has a din of muktzah?
Obviously, it's a Jewish attendant, right?
Yeah, it's a Jewish attendant. So the question is, if you're machmir like Rebbe Yehuda, what right did he have to instruct his attendant to throw the entrails to the cat? So the Gemara answers, Hasam kaven demisrichi me esmol daite iluya. The Gemara says, even Rebbe Yehuda would agree that the entrails are not muktzah. And the reason is because since you can't use them, if you let them stay until after Yantif, they're going to spoil. So you know, when you look at that goose, you're saying 80% of that goose is for me and 20% of that goose is for my cat.
Before Yantif, you've made
even
that
before
allocation.
Yantif, you've made that allocation, and therefore even Rebbe Yehuda would agree that the entrails are non-muktzah for your cat. Yeah.
Is there any reason why the Gemara suddenly speaks about a woman going to the fire? All the way along it's very nondescript. It's something they're saying a woman goes to the fire. She's cooking. They've never said that before.
Mm-hmm. Probably it's because, it's a good point. This is in the course of Rava giving a drush. It says Darash Rava. Rava was giving a shir, and to a community shir. Mm-hmm. So he's speaking in the.
Could have been a ladies' shir.
Could have been a ladies' shir, right, at the BAYT, right? He was using the convention. He was using the convention, right? But you're right, it's a good, interesting point. Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Notel Adam Kissa Mishalafanav Lachatz Otzboshinav Umegaviv Minachatzer Umadlik. So he actually makes two statements, and we'll see that the Chachamim argue with him in both statements. Number one, he says that you're allowed to pick up whatever kind of debris you find in your courtyard is considered to be muchan, is considered to be within your purview for use on Yantif. So if I walk out to my courtyard outside of my house, but it's in my courtyard, and I find a little piece of wood that I can use as a splint, as a toothpick, go right ahead. It's considered to be prepared already, designated for your use from before Yantif. The next thing he says is that you're allowed to, and he says that that makes no difference whether it's in your house or outside. And then he says, specifically referring to a chatzer, is if you find wood, like driftwood, out in your courtyard, you can pick that up and use it as fuel because that's considered to be prepared. So there are two chidushim here that he's telling us. Number one, I hold that you can use a piece of wood as something other than firewood. You can use a piece of wood as a toothpick, even though that was not its designated use from before Yantif. You find a toothpick on the floor, knock yourself out. Even though it sounds a little gross to me, I wouldn't want to put something that was on the floor, especially on a dirt floor, into my mouth. But they weren't as concerned about hygiene. They didn't know about bacteria. So therefore you can use that piece of wood, splinter, use it to get the food out of between your teeth. Shekol masha b'chatzer muchanhu. And everything that's in your chatzer, like Rabbi Eliezer says, is considered to be within your purview. V'chachamim omer megaviv mishalafanav umadlik. And the Chachamim argue in two respects. Number one, you're only allowed to gather wood that's in your house. But if it's outside of your house, in the Chatzer, it's not considered to be Muchan, it's Muktzah. And number two, whatever you gather in the house from wood that's on the floor can only be used for kindling. It cannot be used for any other purpose, including a toothpick. Next, Ein motziin es ha'or lo min ha'etzim v'lo min ha'avanim v'lo min ha'afar v'lo min ha'mayim. So next the Mishnah talks about the production of fire. You cannot produce fire from wood, from stones, or from earth, either or from water. Now the first three is where we're talking about creating sparks in order to make fire. So that you're not allowed to do. And it seems from the Mishnah that there's only a rabbinic prohibition here. And I'm not really sure why it's only rabbinic, because we know that only the transferal of flame is permitted on Yantif, not the spontaneous creation of flame. But it seems from our Mishnah that even the spontaneous creation of flame through sparks is only rabbinically prohibited, because you're being molid, you're creating a flame, right? And also included that is creating it through water. Now, how do you create a flame through water? The answer is you pour water into a glass, and you create a magnifying glass through the prism effect, refraction effect of the water. And therefore, you hold it up in the sun, and it focuses a heat beam on your piece of straw, and it ignites it, and that's how you would do it. So you can't do that on Yantif.
Could you do it without water, like through a magnifying glass?
No, this is only an example. What the Mishnah is essentially saying is you cannot spontaneously create flame on Yantif. And then finally the Mishnah says you're not allowed to heat up tiles in order to use them as a roasting surface. And the Gemara will explain why that is also. Also only a rabbinic prohibition, it seems. The Gemara now says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Ochle behema ein bohem mishum tikun kli. Now, here's the statement. Anything that is fodder for animals, that can be used as animal feed, there's no problem if you were to, in some way, whittle down that piece of straw or hay and turn it into something functional for you. Because once something is food for an animal, there's no problem of tikkun kli, of making a kli out of it. So therefore, if I have a piece of hay that I want to use as a toothpick, but I need to whittle it down, knock yourself out. It's perfectly fine. The only thing I'm not allowed to do is take a piece of inedible material like wood and whittle it down on Shabbos or Yantav. That's actually an isser of creating a kli. So Eisvei Rav Kahana le Rav Yehuda, metaltalin atzei besamim lahariach bahen ulahanif bahen lechoila, umolulo umeriach bo. So my kasha to you, Rav Yehuda, is as follows. We know that there's a brisa that says that you're allowed to take bark or wood that has a fragrance, and you can smell it on Shabbos and Yantiv, and you're allowed to wave it in front of a sick person to help revive him. You're allowed to roll it between your fingers to accentuate the fragrance, but v'lo yikatmenu lahariach bo, v'imkatmo pater aval aser. But you're not allowed to clip it in order to pull out additional fragrance from the meat of the wood. If you do it, you're not doing a malacha because your intention was not to create a kli. Now, lachatzot sposhinav lo yikatmenu v'imkatmo chayiv chatas. However, if you clip it in order to create a toothpick, that's usher, and if you do it, then even b'di'evid you've done a malacha, right? You've done a malacha of the creation. Maybe it's makeh bepatish. Whatever you've done, you've created something, and therefore that's a problem of creating a kli, and that's even a malacha deoraisa. Now, the question that we have is that you see from here that there are many types of aromatic bark that is edible for animals, and yet the Mishnah does not distinguish, and it just says anytime you do it to make a kli, you're doing something that's a malacha. So Amarle hashda pater of al aser kakashali chayv chatas mibaya. So Rav Yehuda's response to that challenge was, if even you had brought me a brisa, which had even indicated that there's an isser derabanan, that would have been enough of a kasha on me. But you've really bombed me. You've brought me a kasha from a brisa that says that you're doing a malacha deoraisa by whittling something down into a toothpick, even when it's edible. So ela kitanya hi bekashin. So therefore, you have to conclude that brisa is not talking about wood that's bark that's edible. It's talking about aromatic bark that's hard and inedible, and that's why you're doing a malacha when you whittle it down. So the Gemara says, "Kashin b'nei malila ninhu." So since when is hard bark? Can it be rolled in your fingers to produce fragrance? It doesn't work. It only works if it's soft. And if it's soft, then it must be edible for animals. So the Gemara says, Chisuri mechser avahachi ketana. You're right. There's a shtickle missing from this brisa, and you have to read it as follows. Mololo umeriach bo, kotma umeriach bo. That on Yantif and Shabbos, you're allowed to roll the aromatic bark between your fingers, or the herbs between your fingers, and you're allowed to clip it in order to get more fragrance out of it. But that's only true when it's soft and edible for animals. But if it's hard and inedible, so therefore there's a problem of creating a kli, and therefore you can't clip it even if your intention is not to create a kli. And if you did it, b'di'evid, you've only done an isser d'Rabbanan, since your intent was not the creation of a kli, but rather to produce fragrance. But if you clip it, this inedible bark or wood, in order to whittle it down to create a toothpick, then even b'di'evid you've done a malacha deoraisa, and you have to bring a korban chatas if you do it on Shabbos. Now, tani chada kotmo meriach bo, v'tani idach lo yikatmenu lahariach bo. So, in a related contradiction, one brisa says that even lechatchila you're allowed to clip it to get fragrance, this aromatic wood, and another brisa says you're not allowed to clip it. So, how do you reconcile it? Amar Reb Zera, Amar Reb Chisda, lo kasha habarachan habakasha. Same answer. Lechatchila it's mutter when it's soft and edible. Lechatchila it's not mutter when it's hard and inedible, because then it's akin to the creation of a kli, even though that's not your intention. It's still rabbinically prohibited.
It doesn't matter. There's normative uses for aromatic purposes and not as a kli?
No, because apparently this kind of wood you could use either to make a kli, or you could use it as fragrance.
I'm saying if
There are plenty of
normally
there are
it's
plenty of types of wood.
Uh-huh.
They even have mint flavored toothpicks. So what if a guy wants to use this piece of wood as a toothpick? If that's your intention, so you're doing a malacha deoraisa. So maskif la Ravacha bar Yaakov bekashan amaylo. So Ravacha bar Yaakov says, I don't understand. You're telling me that you can't whittle down. You can't clip a piece of aromatic bark because midrabanan, because lest you come to make a kli. But what about the following Mishnah, Maseches Shabbos? You have a container that holds dried figs. You need to break open the container to get the figs, and that's okay, even though you're creating a kli. And Moshe and I just had this conversation. Can you open up a soda can on Shabbos? So there are many poskim who are machmir that you can't because you're creating a kli when you open the soda can. But technically, this Mishnah says that it's mutter, because since your intention is not the creation of a kli but to retrieve the contents, then it's okay. So my question to you is, if I'm breaking off the tip of this piece of aromatic wood in order to smell it, as long as my intention is not to create a kli, it should be mutter even lechatchila. Va'od, and furthermore, let me tell you the following story. Harava bar Rav Ada, v'Rabin bar Rav Ada, Amri to Ravayu. These two rabbis said, Ki avinon be Rav Yehuda, ha-mefashech v'yaviv lan aluta, afal gav d'chazya l'kitasa denargi v'chatzina. That when we were by Rav Yehuda's house, and he had these branches that had been removed from the tree from before Yantiv, they had aromatic bark, and he would break off pieces of the tree and give them to us to smell, even though this wood was very hard, and it was usable for the creation of a kli. He says lekitasa denargi, like the handle of an axe, and v'chatzini and other tools. So a pick. So you see that even though it's totally inedible, apparently Rav Yehuda felt it's mutter lechatchila as long as your intention is not to make it into a kli. So how come you're telling me that it's not mutter lechatchila? So the Gemara says lo kasha ha Rabbi Eliezer ha Rabbanan. The answer is it's a machlokas tanoim. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer notel adam kisa mishalafan of lachatzot sposhinav. Now we go back. This is an elaboration of our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer had said that you're allowed to pick up a piece of wood in order to use it as a toothpick. Now here, it's before we're talking about whittling it. Just picking up a piece of wood, Rabbi Eliezer says, is fine. And the Chachamim say you can't. The only thing that you're allowed to do is if it's edible, like a piece of hay from the animal's trough, that you're allowed to use as a toothpick. Vishavin shelo yikatmenu. But both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim agree that you can't whittle a piece of wood or hay down to a toothpick. V'imkat molachatz otzboshina v'liftoach bo hadeles b'shogeg b'shabes chayiv chatas b'mezid b'yom tov sofik eso arboim divrei Rabbi Eliezer. And if you're taking an inedible piece of wood and you do whittle it down to make a kli out of it, either as a toothpick or to use it as a pick key to pick open your door. So then on Shabbos, if you've done it b'shogeg, you're going to have to bring a korban chatas, and if you do it b'mezid on Yontif, you're going to get lashes. That's according to Rabbi Eliezer, that you've done a malacha deoraisa. However, v'chachamim omrim echad zeh ve'echad zeh eno ela mishum shavus. The chachamim say no. Even when your intention is to whittle it down to create a kli, that's not called a malacha deoraisa. That's only called an isser derabbanan. So, and that's true even when your intention is to make it into a kli. Rabbi Eliezer dekamar hasan chayiv chatos hacha pater of al aser. Rabbanan dekamri hasan pater of al aser hacha muter lechatchila. So therefore, it works like this. Rabbi Eliezer, who says that when your intention is to make a kli, you're doing a malacha deoraisa, he'll tell you, he'll paskin that when your intention is not to make a kli, but rather to get some fragrance from the wood, and that's why you're breaking off a piece. Since your intention is not to make a kli, but since if your intention was to make a kli, it would be an isser deoraisa, here we'll impose an isser derabbanan. But the chachamim who say that when you do it even to whittle it down to make a kli, it's only an isser derabbanan, It's not an Isser D'Oraisa. So then when your intention is not to make a Kli, just to get some fragrance from it, it'll be mutter even L'Chatchila. So the bottom line is, the Gemara says, it's a Machlokas Tanoim. Some say it's mutter L'Chatchila to break off a piece for fragrance. That's L'Chachamim. But Rabbi Eliezer will tell you it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. So now the Gemara asks, V'lesle l'Rebbi Eliezer, Hadid nan shover adam es achaves lechel mimena grogros v'vashal iskavin lasos kli. But one second, what's Rabbi Eliezer going to do with the Mishnah? We never see that Rabbi Eliezer argues with that Mishnah in Shabbos, which says that you're allowed to break open the container in order to get the figs. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, that should be usher, even though your intention is not to make a kli. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravashi kitan yahi b'mustiki. Answers Ravashi that the reason why Rabbi Eliezer doesn't disagree over there, and he holds that it is mutter to break open the container of figs, is because there it's talking about a container that's dilapidated already. Rashi says that mustaki is a type of container that's made out of broken shards that they would put back together with glue. They would glue it back together. And since it's dilapidated and not really usable a second time, it's like, I guess if you have like something that is meant to be disposable,
Bag of potato chips.
right, like a bag of potato chips, since it's not meant to be used as a kli a second time, it's just used for temporary storage, they would use this dilapidated refuse material and just glue it back together. And therefore, since your intention is not to use that as a kli, even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that that's okay. Let's just finish up to the two dots. That according to Rabbi Eliezer, you're allowed to gather driftwood from your courtyard. Tana Rabbanan megaviv min hachatzer umadlik, that you're allowed to gather from the chatzer and use whatever wood you find as kindling. Shekol masha b'chatzer muchanhu, because everything in your courtyard is within your purview. Uvilvad shelo yaset tzivurin v'Reb Shimon matir. But there's one proviso: you can't accumulate the wood in a stack on Yontif. But Reb Shimon says even that is okay. So the question is, b'may kamiflagi? What's the machlokas? Mar savar mechzi de kamachnif lemachar ulayom acharina. Mar savar kedei rasu mochachas alav. That reason why Rabbi Eliezer says you can't make stacks out of it is because it looks like you're accumulating wood for tomorrow and another day, and that's a desecration, or it's a deprecation of Yontif, to use it as a day of doing chores. And Reb Shimon says, no, it doesn't look that way. Look, everyone knows the Balabusta's got a lot of food to cook on Yontif, so everyone will see she needs a lot of kindling to heat up the stove. Next, Ein motziin es ha'or v'chule, you're not allowed to produce fire from rocks, from wood, from magnifying glass. So my timer, what's the reason? Mishum to kamolid b'yomtov. You're creating something new on Yontif. I haven't had the chance to research why this is only an Isser D'Rabbanan. But this Gemara is of the opinion that it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. It sounds like to me that according to this Gemara, even striking a match would only be an Isser D'Rabbanan of creation of a flame, not like we had always assumed that creating flame is an Isser D'Oraisa, because the Torah only permits the transferal of flame. If anyone sees anything, please let me know. But I don't have a clear mahalach in this Gemara. Someone quoted to me the Shita this morning who says that it's only Isser D'Rabbanan because the fire is sort of like inside the rock and inside the wood and inside the water, and you're just...
Cool.
What?
Like a coal, you're saying. Fire's inside.
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. There's no fire inside a magnifying glass. There's no fire inside a glass of water that you're using to magnify the sun's heat. Unless you say that you're transferring the heat from the sun,
yeah.
And you're focusing it in, and there's potential energy within the rock, or unless you're using what is it called? Geothermal energy. It's toldo sachama.
So it's removed, one step removed, the Raizel.
Okay, I guess
What would the Torah define as creation of a fire?
already
The
there.
those things you said.
Yeah, because nothing's created from nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't have clarity on this point. So tzarechiyun. So if anyone can let me know.
Say Kaddish.
Okay. Rabbi Chanan ben Akasha Omer.